All right, so let me start here by, I don't know how many of you have been in meetings where we've talked about this. So what I've got up here is kind of a history and timeline of all of the various usability activities around DataMeD. Although it looks sequential, it's actually more complex because it's an iterative process. Like, pointer's working good. So we started out very early on. This was in the pre-beta with a needs analysis where we did semi-structured interviews. So this was before any bit of DataMeD existed. We went out and just talked to individuals and looked at how they were finding data. I've got slides on each of these to go into a little more detail. We've then done some observational studies, which are these one-on-one observations of users searching for data sets in the beta of DataMeD, and that was done the first quarter of 2016, and there's more of those planned. We have a usability survey of existing users implemented in Qualtrics. One version of this was done as part of this study here in first quarter of 2016, and then we're hoping by the end of September to launch the second one. In fact, I think it's actually live but not sent out yet. So we've had several rounds of revising that. And then we have the summative usability study, which we're currently planning with Working Group 9. So let's just look at some of that. The needs analysis was really to start getting some early user needs. To our knowledge, even to this day, there was really nothing out there looking at actual user needs. There were lots of felt difficulties. No one had really gone out and studied users. So we looked at why researchers look for data sets and how they currently find data sets. And this was just interviewing 13 individuals for at least 30 minutes each. Some we did it in person if they were local in Houston. Many were done through the phone. And it came up with a number of different areas where there were problems. And it was interesting here because when you initially asked these individuals, well, for the most part, are you having trouble finding data sets? They all said no. And then as you actually kept working with them and had them show you what they were doing, it turned out that, yes, in fact, they did. So it really validated the need for something like DataMeD. And we use the data from this to inform DataMed's development. We then did some observational studies where once the beta was available, we would have individuals use the beta, but we didn't give them tasks. We just said, well, here it is. Here's the point of this. Try to use it to find things. Now remember, we've added repositories. So at first there weren't that many repositories, but it's still useful to get feedback. And then based on that, we basically went in and coded a lot of the information. So you can see here in this first round, there were 8 participants. We did some broad classification of the issues along positive, challenges, and negatives. And you can see how each type of person what kinds of things they came up with. And then we coded it further, so we had challenges by area, and this just kind of gives a summary here, and then counts by severity and issue. And this was all, I just quickly did this in Tableau, so it's an interactive, you can explore it and drill down, drill up. So once we used that to kind of refine the coding system, those issues also went directly into GitHub. So a user might go to GitHub and submit an issue, but if we get issues from any of these usability studies, then we actually put them into GitHub. And so you can see here there's issues tagged with usability. Some of these came from users directly, some of them came from the studies. And then I go in and go over those and make a comment on it and give it a severity rate. Right? 0 is basically not a problem. 3 is major, really you shouldn't be shipping. There's a major problem. And eventually, there's some decision taken, often changes are made, and then the issue's closed. So we've also been working on, with input from a number of groups, the CDT and the Working Group 9, on a usability survey of existing users that kind of builds on the survey we used in the observational study, but now that we have more DataMeD up and running in version 1, we wanted to kind of get a little more information on these areas. I'm not going to go ahead and read this, but we've been through several rounds of revising the survey, and I think the current version is up and will get pushed out. So as individuals log into DataMeD, they'll be asked, do you want to take a survey, usability survey a month later, and then a month after they've logged in, it'll push out that survey to them. So that's the current plan. And this is where I think we need probably the most discussion. We've had several rounds of discussion on the summative usability test. What we're currently thinking is that we'll evaluate the usability of DataMeD on tasks with validated results, essentially coming from the task that Trevor just described, because a lot of effort's gone into validating those results. So we'll have a certain number of subjects. We have not determined how many yet because the design is not finalized. They need to be experienced with the domain of those queries because we want to give them queries for which we know the answers. We'll capture their screen and the voice. They'll all receive all the tasks. And what we'll have them do is say, well, tell us when you're satisfied with your query. That gets a little complex with DataMeD simply because of the faceted browsing. They can do a very general query and then start filtering down, and that's okay. So we'll have to play with that as we see what happens. And then we'll have them indicate relevant documents. So right now, these are the tasks that we've picked from the set of tasks that Trevor talked about. The reason we picked these is that these have a very small number of relevant documents. So some of those tasks have hundreds of relevant documents. And it's just not feasible for the users to sit there, and I'd like to keep it to about an hour, and go through all of them. No one's going to do that, right? We still, despite us we're trying to do things like ICDel and get more visual results, but like Google, like PubMed, what you predominantly get through these systems is a long list of results. And one problem is, even if you have the greatest list, and they're prioritized correctly, still there's too many relevant things. Okay, so that's why we're also exploring, as part of the user interface design, some of these other analytic approaches, some of the more graphic design approaches to try to help users better understand and find results. Okay, so here's the metrics we want to look at. So one is time to develop the final query. Now, again, there's evidence from, say, I2B2. I don't know if you're familiar with that for clinical data searching. There's some evidence there that most users think they have the right answer, and they don't. In other words, they have the right query, and they don't. So it'll be interesting to see what we find here. But again, because of the faceted browsing, that's a little more complex question. This was actually cut off here, time to actually sort of find the articles themselves and identify the relevant articles. Number of queries needed to generate the final query, so kind of looking at query refinement. Whether the final query is correct, and then precision and recall compared to the correct query. And then, again, this is an iterative process, so we plan more observational studies. One of the things we've gone back and forth about the summative studies, should we compare it to some standard, where the standard would be, say, how the users are currently searching for information. The trouble is that, with Trevor's input on and his experience with evaluating information retrieval systems, that is almost never done, because if they're out in the wild, who knows what they're going to use, and then we don't have gold standards. Or if they propose their own task, we don't have gold standards. Those are great for formative studies, but not for summative evaluations, which is what we're trying to do with that previous study. So we want to do more observational studies, and some of them will involve having users basically, we'll say, we'll find the data set using whatever method you usually use. Now, can you try to use DataMeD to find the same data set? Okay. Even that's a little difficult if it's the same data set and they already know that it exists. All right, questions, comments?